Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for joining this session with A3 High-Tech and VCS on the topic of e-invoicing for businesses. Basically, as everyone doing business in Saudi Arabia is well versed, is by December 4, 2020, the Saudi government has started implementation of e-invoicing. Basically, the rules and guidelines have been given out, and today we will discuss what are the specifications of this particular e-invoicing, which will start in Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So let me give you a quick introduction about myself. My name is Adnan Roshan, and I am a senior techno-functional consultant at A3 High-Tech Software and Consulting Services. A3 High-Tech Software Consulting Services, as well as VCS, have been in the ERP business for quite a lot of time, and with over 100 satisfied implementations in Saudi Arabia, we can assure that our product Business Navigator ERP is quite well versed with the Saudi market specifically. So let me now quickly jump into the topics which we'll discuss today. And first, we'll quickly have a quick walkthrough, basically, what we are going to understand from this. So the first quick walkthrough of the e-invoicing implementation, we'll be looking at the implementation timeline. When I talk about the implementation timeline, the necessary important timelines for the implementation of e-invoicing in Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Basically, the ZATCA authorities, they have decided to implement it in phase 1 and phase 2. We'll be looking what is phase 1 and phase 2 in the upcoming slides. And we'll be looking at the general specification, what is e-invoicing, and what would be the specifications regarding that, what does e-invoicing generally mean. And we'll be looking at the invoice type, what kind of invoices have been defined by the ZATCA authorities, how do you report them, how do you make them, etc. All this will be covered in the types of invoices. And then we'll be looking at the phase 1, which would be the initial phase set out by the ZATCA, and we'll look at the features regarding them. Then we'll look at the phase 2, and we'll look at the features regarding the phase 2. Or then we will jump to the Business Navigator ERP, and we will look this flows over there. So let us quickly have a quick review of the implementation timeline. And December 1st, 2020, the publication of the e-invoicing regulation. Basically, the requirements regarding the e-invoicing has been published on 2020 by the ZATCA authorities, and this was giving it set an implementation timeline, basically what each phase is going to do, what is the e-invoicing, everything. All this documentation has been done by the ZATCA on December 1, 2020. And then December 4, 2021, it would be the e-invoicing generation enforcement phase. Basically, from December 4, 2021, the first phase of the e-invoicing, which is the generation and storage of electronic invoices, it will be done on December 4, 2021, and physical copies of invoices will be invalid. Everything has to be done according to the regulations set out by the ZATCA. Then the January 1st, 2023, which will be the integration enforcement phase, which will be the second phase, the final phase, basically. And this would be reporting of the invoices to the ZATCA authorities through their portals. So let us quickly first look at what types of invoices need to be reported and what are the features regarding this invoices. So basically, there are two types of invoices. There is a tax invoice and a simplified tax invoice. Now, what a tax invoice is it is generally to be used in B2B transactions or invoices greater than or equal to 1,000 Saudi riyal. So basically, the invoice type description, the tax invoice is going to include certain mandatory fields, and without this mandatory fields, an invoice is invalid and will not be considered legitimate. So first thing is it should contain an invoice type description, the invoice reference number, invoice issue date, the seller's name, address, and ID, the buyer's name, address, and ID, the product or service description, and the VAT calculation fields, which is the net amount, the gross amount, the VAT rate for each product or service, and the subtotals basically. So this was the tax invoice. Now let's look at what the simplified tax invoice is. Now a simplified tax invoice would be generally used in B2C transactions or invoices less than 1,000 Saudi Riyal. In the simplified tax invoice, you have similar types of field related to the tax invoice, but there are a few mandatory additions over here. The first thing would be there is the invoice type description and the invoice reference number, the invoice issue date, the product or service description, the seller's name, address, and ID, the VAT calculation fields again, the net amount, gross amount, VAT rate, subtotals, etc. And it has to have a mandatory QR code on the e-invoice or its e-note. So now the question would arise is, for example, if there's a cancellation or change, how is it supposed to be integrated in this phase one? So the simple answer would be to issue a debit or a credit note. Now, what a debit or credit note is it is to be issued when there is cancellation of cancellation, material change, or any other sort of alteration occurs in the original invoice. The nature will be same as its respective invoice. If it is a debit or a credit note for a tax invoice, it would be in the similar format of the tax invoice. If it is for the simplified tax invoice, it would be in the similar tax invoice. And basically, the point is once an invoice has been created, it cannot be cancelled or reopened accordingly. It has to be done through a debit or a credit note. So let us look at, let us brief phase one in a nutshell, which will start from December 4, 2021. Invoices need to be generated in an electronic format. Now, an electronic format includes, as described, it is a PDF A3 format, and the invoice needs to be generated through an appropriate e-invoicing solution. This e-invoicing solution, it needs to be basically an ERP or any other invoicing solution or like a point of sale, and it needs to be in a proper format. It cannot, even if a PDF A3, it cannot be manually made. It has to be a system generated invoice. And these invoices need to be electronically stored, basically. All these invoices, they need to be sellers, they need to have a collection, they need to archive all these invoices, and they should be able to present this electronically when requested by the ZATCA authorities. And the copy of the invoice would be sent to the buyer with the mandatory fields. Without the mandatory fields, basically the invoice will be considered invalid, and it would be not considered as a proper invoice. And then there is the optional generation of QR code for tax invoice and mandatory QR code for simplified tax invoice. There could be a optional QR code in a tax invoice, but a mandatory QR code is required for the simplified tax invoice. This was a simple phase one. Now let us look at what happens in the business flow. Now in the first business flow, let us look at step by step to truly understand what happens. Basically, there is the generation phase, which is the phase one, and the standard invoices, which is the tax invoice. What happens is that the supplier generates the invoice and the supplier shares the invoice with mandatory fields to the buyer. It's as simple as that in an electronic format with the mandatory fields. And that is for the tax invoice. For the simplified tax invoice, the supplier generates this invoice, including the QR code and mandatory fields, and shares it with the buyer. And for this simplified tax invoice, a QR code is quite mandatory. Without it, an invoice would be considered invalid. Now let us look at phase two. We'll move on to the phase two, which will start from January 1st of 2023. Everything would be same as phase one, only the addition would be basically the invoices need to be in an Saudi Arabian XML invoice UBL 2.1 or in a PDF A3 with XML embedded. It needs to have a digital signature and a UUID. And the last would be the most important is invoices will need to go through the ZATCA's new e-invoicing platform. This requires using API integration to connect your e-invoicing solution to the central platform. Basically, in simple terms, your ERP or other e-invoicing solution, it needs to have an API integration, and these invoices need to be invoices or e-notes need to be directly pushed through the ZATCA's portal. Let us look at the business flow regarding the phase 2, basically. Now, let us look at the business flow for the phase 2. In the phase 2, what happens is that this, which will be the integration phase, basically. Now, in the integration phase, let us first look at the standard invoices, which is the tax invoice. First, the supplier generates the invoice, and then the supplier generates it and sends it to the ZATCA portal. And after the ZATCA portal has been verified, it verifies and clears the invoice, basically. When it clears the invoice, the supplier receives the cleared invoice, and then the supplier can now share this cleared invoice to the buyer. And after the buyer gets this, the buyer can cross-verify the invoice through the ZATCA portal. And then for the simplified tax invoice, what happens is that the supplier stores the invoice. Basically, the supplier generates invoice, including the QR code, and it shares to the buyer, which is the end consumer. And the buyer can scan the QR code, which would be in the simplified tax invoice, and verify the particular invoice. Also, the supplier will need to store this invoice and share with ZATCA on a timely basis, which could be monthly, weekly, or whatever is preferable. Now we'll move on to the Business Navigator ERP, and let us have a quick review of e-invoicing on Business Navigator and see how the workflow dictates. Now, if we see over here, there's the sales invoice, and what we have to do is that let me quickly first go to the delivery note. And if I go to the delivery note, it shows me we have a delivery note for AMG Campbell Incorporation. And AMG Campbell Incorporation, basically, yes, basically the AMG Campbell Incorporation, I had made a delivery note, which is of 50,000 amount, and the tax amount would be 7,500, basically. And this is currently open, which means no invoice of this particular delivery note has been made. Let me quickly jump to the invoices. When I go to the invoice, I have the AMG. Let me create a new invoice. When I click the new, I can select these details, the reference number 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, the document date, the current date. The system will pick the current date. And let me just click on the party, and it will show me the party name, which is the AMJ. Let me type and search it. There is the AMJ Campbell. I got the AMJ Campbell. And let me click the OK over here. When I click the OK over here, you can see there is a document number, which is the 406, created for the party AMJ Campbell. And when I jump to the pick from delivery note option, I will see my particular delivery note, which is delivery note DV1099, and I will have to add it to the invoice. In a simple click, it'll ask me the quantity. The system will ask me the quantity. Currently, I'll take the full quantity, and I'll click the add to document. And when I add to document, you can see on the top, there is the total amount, the tax amount 7,500, the net amount, all these fields are mandatory, required by the ZATCA guidelines. And this has been reflected over here. If I go to the lines, I will see the product or service description, the item code, description, quantity, all these fields will be available over here. And I will just click the approve button over here. And approve button is basically finalizing the invoice. Once I've approved this, I can see there is a button over here called something called generate e-invoice. And let me just quickly click on this, and I'll have two options over here. For now, I will just quickly make the tax invoice. And when I click the tax invoice, the system will pull out a PDF with the tax invoice. And when I click,
Okay, so let me quickly jump to the details of the tax invoice. We have the tax invoice over here, and let us see what all the details are required and mandatory by the ZATCA authorities. The first thing is the invoice number, the invoice date, and the date of supply. Now, what's the difference between the invoice issue date as well as the date of supplies? The invoice date is the booking date of the invoice. The date of supply is when you're submitting this particular invoice to the customer. Then you have the seller details, which is your details, your company name, address, as well as the VAT number. Then you have the buyer details, which is basically your customer's details and the buyer's name, the address, as well as the VAT details. Then if you go down, you have something called the line details, which is the line items. Whatever items or services you have, the details including the unit price, quantity, the totals and the subtotals, everything will be over here in a detailed fashion. Then when you go down, you have the total amounts, which is basically a quick summary, which is basically summarizing all the details over here, the total and the subtotal of the whole invoice. And if you quickly look over here as well, as there is the QR code. If you'd like to scan it and verify it through the ZATCA app, you can do it. But right now what I'll do is that I'll share my mobile's screen, and I'll show you how it can be verified. Okay, so let me open the VAT official app to scan the code. Let me just quickly skip through it. And now we have the details over here. What we'll do, I'll click over here, then I'll click the scan QR code. After the QR code, let me quickly scan this. Okay, my invoice has been scanned. Let me just click the OK over here, because I believe location is, and if you see my screen over here, you have this invoice has been verified by the ZATCA app, and it is officially compatible according to the ZATCA regulations.
Thank you for joining with me today. Thank you.